Okay, so now moving on in Blake's Bible of Hell, I want to discuss the first book of Your Reason. Here it is. I found a website with it. This is the title page. It originally said the first book of Your Reason, and he struck out the word first later on, probably deciding that he didn't want to write sequels to it. So now it's just the book of Your Reason here. And we see the figure of Your Reason. He's sitting down on a book, and he's inscribing the book of the universe, because this is a creation myth in a way that parodies the book of Genesis. In his right hand, he's got a quill. In his left hand, he's got an engraving tool. And then behind him are the Ten Commandments. They look like tombstones for a reason, because as far as Blake is concerned, as we have seen, for him the Ten Commandments are a stiff, dead way of approaching the world. They're too stiff, they're too rigid. So this is Your Reason. And so now this is his sort of creation myth. We'll read through the first half of it here on this video. And let's see, get it here. This is the preludium to the book of Your Reason, which begins, of the primeval priest's assumed power, when Eternal spurned back his religion and gave him a place in the north, obscure, shadowy, void, solitary. Eternals, I hear your call gladly. Dictate swift-winged words and fear not to unfold your dark visions of torment. And so that's his invocation to the muses, which he calls here the Eternals, or the Eternals are simply his word for what in Rudolf Steiner, let's say, would be the angels, the creator beings, and there's a multitude of them. And Your Reason begins now as an Eternal who is in a state of the infinite, of plenitude, of totality. And then what happens is that he begins to divide himself. He divides the finite from the infinite. And eventually, Blake portrays this as a very dark, negative myth, almost like the Gnostics, for whom the world was a mistake as far as the Gnostics were concerned. And it was created by Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth is their sort of parody of Yahweh, whom they identified, by the way, with the planet Saturn, who creates the world as a prison that traps souls in it. The world for the Gnostics is sort of like a machine designed for a soul cage, to put it in the words of Sting from his album, The Soul Cages. It's a soul cage. The body is a tomb, soma sema. The body is a tomb that the only way you can get out of is through Gnostic realization. And so, which is equivalent here to what we discussed last time in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, with Blake's idea of spiritual perception. That is the only way to cleanse the doors of perception. But now what we're going to see here is the reverse of that. Through Your Reason's creation, and then his offspring Laz, which is son, Saul, spelled backwards. He's a sun god, but he's also a blacksmith and a prophet. And in a way, he's more like the demiurge than Your Reason is. Your Reason is actually more or less in a passive role here. And Saul springs forth parthenogenically from his side. That's the motif of what I call the paternal vulva. Blake appropriates that here, like Adam springing from the side, or Eve springing from the side of Adam. That's the paternal vulva. And so Laz comes in and he tries to fix the situation, but he ends up making it worse by creating days, months, years, by dividing time, slicing it into pieces, dividing space. He's a blacksmith. So this is what he's doing, thinking that he's improving things, but he's not. He's simply making what Blake calls the mind-forged manacles, or the prison house, the cavern of the senses, that wipe away the infinite and disconnect us from it. So this is a very negative myth. And then here is the chapter. It's a bit hard to read. So it goes, 1. Lo, a shadow of horror is risen in eternity. Unknown, unprolific, self-closed, all-repelling. What demon hath formed this abominable void, this soul-shuddering vacuum? Some said, it is Your Reason, but unknown, abstracted, brooding secret the dark power hid. So you can see here that not only is Blake's art getting better, but so also is the poetry. 2. Times on times he divided and measured space by space in his ninefold darkness, unseen, unknown. Changes appeared like desolate mountains rifted furious by the black winds of perturbation. So we think of this world as a state of chaos. Although Urizen is still in the role of an eternal and immortal at this point. He has not yet separated the finite from the infinite. For he strove in battles dire and unseen conflictions with shapes bred from his forsaken wilderness of beast, bird, fish, serpent, and element, combustion, blast, vapor, and cloud. 4. Dark, revolving, and silent activity, unseen in tormenting passions, and activity unknown and horrible, a self-contemplating shadow and enormous labors occupied. 5. But eternals beheld his vast forests. Age on ages he lay, closed, unknown, brooding shut in the deep. All avoid the petrific abominable chaos. His cold horrors, silent, dark Urizen prepared, his 10,000s of thunders ranged in gloomed array stretch out across the dread world, and the rolling of wheels as of swelling seas sound in his clouds, in his hills of stored snows, in his mountains of hail and ice. Voices of terror are heard like thunders of autumn when the cloud blazes over the harvest. He also borrows from Germanic myth in this, and so there are references here to the icy north. It's as though Urizen were also simultaneously a Nordic creator god, like Wotan. And then so chapter 2, which is, is down here in the corner. Earth was not. Now in chapter 2, this is where he specifically divides the finite from the infinite. So all of this is seen as a fall, as a gradual fall of unity into plurality, of the pleroma, what the Gnostics call the pleroma, the fullness of spiritual energy, which is lost and gradually restricted through the Saturnian principle of constriction that both Urizen and loss represent. So Earth was not, nor globes of attraction, referring to Newton's laws of universal gravitation. Those are not active yet. The will of the immortal expanded or contracted his all-flexible senses. Death was not, but eternal life sprung. The sound of a trumpet the heavens awoke, and vast clouds of blood rolled round the dim rocks of Urizen, so named that solitary one in immensity. Shrill the trumpet, and myriads of eternity. I think we need another page here of text. Now, note too that the images have gotten quite a bit more confident, self-confident, and larger, to the point where now on his pages they're pushing out the text. Whereas before in earlier texts, including the prophetic books, America and the Europe, A Prophecy, and the Song of Laws, there the images are sort of adornments of the text. Here now the images are neck and neck in full competition with the text. All right, and so here we move on with an image of Urizen here, creating the book of nature, but it's made out of metal. And so it goes, let's see where. Shrill the trumpet and myriads of eternity muster around the bleak deserts, now filled with clouds, darkness, and waters that rolled perplexed, laboring and uttered words articulate, bursting in thunders that rolled on the tops of his mountains. For, from the depths of dark solitude, from the eternal abode in my holiness, hidden, set apart in my stern counsels, reserved for the days of futurity, I have sought for a joy without pain, for a solid without fluctuation. Why will you die, O Eternals? Why live in unquenchable burnings? And so now here in this verse, chapter 2, verse 5, we see the four elements come into being, and they follow the sequence that they're supposed to, the lightest, namely fire, down to the heaviest, through air, below fire, to water, then to earth as the heaviest. First I fought with the fire, consumed inwards into a deep world within. Now that will become another parthenogenic birth of the god, the character named Fuzon, who is similar to Orc, another rebel who will fight against his father and actually will castrate him, just like with Uranus and Gaia, who then give rise to Kronos, that is to say Saturn, who has a sickle that he castrates his father with and throws the genitals into the ocean, and they become Aphrodite. And in the book of Ahania, which follows this, the same thing happens when Fuzon castrates his father Urizen and throws out the genitals, and they become Ahania. his consort, Blake's version of Sophia. A void immense, wild, dark, and deep, where nothing was. Nature's wide womb and self-balanced, stretched o'er the void. I alone, even I, the winds, so now we have air, the winds merciless bound, but condensing in torrents they fall and fall. Strong I repelled the vast waves and arose on the waters. Now we're down to water. A wide world of solid obstruction. Now we're down to earth. Here alone I in books formed of metals, and so we see him up here with his book of metal, have written the secrets of wisdom, the secrets of dark contemplation by fightings and conflicts dire, with terrible monsters sin-bred, which the bosoms of all inhabit, 7 deadly sins of the soul. So in come the 7 deadly sins here, which are pride, avarice, envy, wrath, lust, gluttony, and sloth. 7. Lo, I unfold my darkness, and on this rock place with strong hand the book of eternal brass, written in my solitude. 8. Laws of peace, of love, of unity, of pity, compassion, forgiveness. Let each choose one habitation, his ancient infinite mansion, one command, one joy, one desire, one curse, one weight, one measure, one king, one God, one law. In a way that echoes Derrida's idea about the logocentric age, where he takes over Heidegger's metaphysical age, which extends from Plato to Nietzsche, and Derrida appropriates it and calls it the logocentric age, in which there's always only one meaning that is privileged. The metaphysical age has been set up out of a series of polarities, as we have seen with Blake's contraries, spirit versus nature, male versus female, heaven versus hell. But the thing about those metaphysical binaries is that there's always one term that is privileged over the other. Heaven is privileged over hell, as we have seen. The male is privileged over the female. Spirit is privileged over nature. And so there's words tend to have in that tradition only one meaning, which is what Joyce attempts to do in Finnegan's Wake by exploding words and releasing them from the controls and the shackles of the logocentric age. Chapter 3, the voice ended. They saw his pale visage emerge from the darkness, his hand on the rock of eternity unclasping the book of brass. Rage seized the strong. 2. Rage, fury, intense indignation in cataracts of fire, blood, and gall, in whirlwinds of sulphurous smoke, and enormous forms of energy. And here's where this text, I went to the next page too quickly. It begins top left right here. In living creations appeared in the flames of eternal fury. 3. Sundering, darkening, thundering, rent away with a terrible crash, eternity rolled wide apart, wide asunder, rolling mountainous all around, departing, 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 leaving ruinous fragments of life, hanging frowning cliffs, and all between an ocean of voidness unfathomable. 4. The roaring fires ran o'er the heavens in whirlwinds and cataracts of blood, and o'er the dark deserts of Urizen fires pour through the void on all sides, on Urizen's self-begotten armies. 5. But no light from the fires. All was darkness in the flames of eternal fury. 6. In fierce anguish and quenchless flames to the deserts and rocks, he ran raging to hide, but he could not. Combining, he dug mountains and hills in vast strength. He piled them in incessant labor, in howlings and pangs and fierce madness, long periods in burning fires, laboring till hoary and age broke and aged in despair and the shadows of death. And so now he begins to separate out in the next couple of verses his heart from his mind. The brain and the mind become separated out, and gradually the human body will come into being, but it will be made here by Los. And Los comes into being here in verse 8 from his side. And so 7 goes, and a roof vast petrific around, on all sides he framed, like a womb, where thousands, Peter Sloterdijk would call this a uteromorphic cosmology, where thousands of rivers and veins of blood pour down the mountains to cool the eternal fires beating without from eternals, and like a black globe viewed by sons of eternity, standing on the shore of the infinite ocean like a human heart struggling and beating the vast world of Urizen appeared. And so 8. And Las, around the dark globe of Urizen, kept watch for eternals to confine the obscure separation alone. For eternity stood wide apart as the stars are apart from the earth. Okay, and so we're ready for another page here. And then we have another illustration of Urizen here, lost in the darkness of the void that he has created. And then this page here, which shows loss in the middle and the principle of bondage. But actually, Blake has borrowed this image from the image of Phanes from the Mithraic tradition, where Phanes is appearing in the middle of the zodiac, which represents space and time, opening up like a vagina, and he is the embryo within it. And there's an egg hatching. He's standing on the bottom half of the egg and the top half of the egg, with the serpent of time coiling and binding around him. He's got a lion's face coming out of his chest, and to one side a deer, and to the other a ram. And he's holding the thunderbolt and also his measuring staff. The thunderbolt of illumination, which would be equivalent to the Gnostic release from bondage. And here, by the way, is Blake's earlier vision of what has been popularly called the Ancient of Days, but Blake never called it that, of Urizen creating with a geometer's compass, which is what he does. And then now we have Saul doing this, rather Los. And Los wept howling around the dark demon, and cursing his lot for an anguish Urizen was rent from his side, and a fathomless void for his feet, and intense fires for his dwelling. So it's sort of like an upside-down crucifixion here, too, with Christ in the middle and the two thieves on either side of him. In Mithraism, this is Mithras in the middle of the two twins, Cotys and Cotopates, which represent the two equinoxes, spring and fall. 10. But Urizen laid in a stony sleep, unorganized, rent from eternity. 11. The Eternal said, "What is this? Death. Urizen is a clod of clay." So death is something new to them that these two demiurges are bringing into being. There's the image of the fall. It reminds me a bit of the fall of Nous into Phusis, the mind that falls into the crater of Phusis, that is to say, the material world. From the Neoplatonic Hermetic tradition, that myth is. And so here we have, again, Los howled in a dismal stupor, groaning, gnashing, groaning, till the wrenching apart was healed. 13. But the wrenching of Urizen healed not, cold, featureless, flesh or clay, rifted with direful changes. He lay in a dreamless night. 14. Till Los roused his fires, affrighted at the formless, unmeasurable death. So Los is a sun god as well. And then here we have the image of the creation of the human body in an embryonic, contracted, womb-like state. But the important thing about it is the spine. As it was for Goethe with his theory that the human skull is made out of transformations of the vertebrae. Los, smitten with astonishment, frightened at the hurtling bones. 2. And at the surging, sulphureous, perturbed, immortal, mad raging. 3. In whirlwinds and pitch and nitre, round the furious limbs of Los. And Los formed nets and gins, and threw the nets round about. 5. He watched in shuddering fear the dark changes, and bound every change with rivets of iron and brass. 6. And these were the changes of Urizen. All right, so move on to just a couple more pages here, and there's Urizen. He's been put into a state of bondage with the blacksmith. Los has bonded him and shackled him. And then here we'll finish for this video here with an image of Los and the idea, Blake's idea of the cave. Remember Plato's cave, and the idea that the cave is the prison house of the senses that trap the human mind and prevent it from seeing with the vision of spiritual perception and cleansing the doors of perception. Here, the doors of perception in this creation myth are not being cleansed. They're being created as blockages to the human view of the infinite. 1. Ages on ages rolled over him. In stony sleep, ages rolled over him, like a dark waste, stretching changeable by earthquakes riven, belching sullen fires. On ages rolled, and there'll be 7 ages here because Blake is parodying the book of Genesis, God's creation of the world in 6 days and then resting on the 7th. And so Los is in that role. On ages rolled, ages in ghastly, sick torment. Around him in whirlwinds of darkness, the eternal prophet howled, beating still on his rivets of iron, pouring solder of iron, dividing the horrible night into watches. 2. And Urizen, so his eternal name, his prolific delight obscured more and more in dark secrecy, hiding in surging sulphureous fluid, his fantasies. The eternal prophet, and that's the Blake referring to Laws. The eternal prophet heaved the dark bellows, and turned restless the tongs, and the hammer incessant beat, forging chains new, and new numbering with links, hours, days, and years. So he creates time, basically, as we've seen the same image here with the Fani's image. He's creating the structure of space and time, the zodiac, the ecliptic, all of that, the celestial equator. 3. The eternal mind bounded, began to roll eddies of wrath, ceaseless round and round, and the sulphureous foam, surging thick, settled, a lake, bright and shining clear, white as the snow on the mountains cold. 4. Forgetfulness, dumbness, necessity, Plato's myth, in other words, of the soul forgetting its divine origins, as in fact we do. We reincarnate from lifetime to lifetime, but once we're born into the shackles of another body, we get a memory wipe and don't remember anything. Like C-3PO and R2-D2, at the end of, is it the Phantom Menace or at the end of actually the third of the prequels, Return of the Sith, when they're given a memory wipe so that they don't remember that, for example, Darth Vader is C-3PO's father. 4. Forgetfulness, dumbness, necessity, in chains of the mind locked up, like fetters of ice, shrinking together, disorganized, rent from eternity. Laws beat on his fetters of iron and heated his furnaces and poured iron solder and solder of brass. 5. Restless turned the immortal enchained, heaving dolorous, anguished, unbearable, till a roof shaggy wild enclosed in an orb his fountain of thought. That roof enclosing his fountain of thought is the skull. So the human skull now is being formed like a cave, a prison house. 6. In a horrible, dreamful slumber, like the linked infernal chain, a vast spine writhed in torment under the winds, shooting pained ribs like a bending cavern, and bones of solidness froze over all his nerves of joy, and a first age passed over, and a state of dismal woe. So that's the first age. And let's see here. One more page, I think. We'll finish here with this one. And this is an image of Laws with his, you can see his tong, or rather his hammer in the bottom right-hand corner. And then he's creating the archetype of the human form here. These lines are hard to read. 7. From the caverns of his jointed spine, he's creating the anthropos, basically, the human archetype. Down sunk with fright a red round globe, not hot burning deep, deep down into the abyss, panting, conglobing, trembling, shooting out 10,000 branches around his solid bones, and a second age passed over, and a state of dismal woe. 8. In harrowing fear, rolling round his nervous brain shot branches round the branches of his heart, on high into 2 little orbs, and fixed in 2 little caves, hiding carefully from the wind, his eyes beheld the deep. These are the caves of the eye sockets. And a third age passed over, and a state of dismal woe. 9. The pangs of hope began, in heavy pain striving, struggling, 2 ears in close volutions from beneath his orbs of visions, shot, spiring out, and petrified as they grew, and a fourth age passed, and a state of dismal woe. 10. In ghastly torment sick, hanging upon the wind, and this looks like it leaks over into another page. Now there he is, like the Fani's epiphany, the epiphany of the human form. And then a little bit of this just to finish chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. In ghastly torment sick, within his ribs bloated round, a craving hungry cavern. Thence arose his channeled throat, and like a red flame a tongue of thirst and of hunger appeared, and a sixth age passed over, and a state of dismal woe. And he keeps reiterating that each one of these creations is a fall, it's a prison, it's a capturing and diminishing of human vision so that it can't see the infinite. 12. Enraged and stifled with torment, he threw his right arm to the north, and that's what he's being depicted as here. His right arm to the north, his left arm to the south, shooting out in anguish deep, and his feet stamped the nether abyss in trembling and howling and dismay. And a seventh age passed over, and a state of dismal woe. So we'll stop there, up to chapter 5 of Blake's magnificent creation myth.